On this episode of Faith and Focus, I just want to warn you at the outset, there was a slight audio problem. So the microphone was not recording properly for most of the episode. The audio I tried to adjust so it was tried to match the regular audio quality. It's listenable, but it's not as good as this microphone is. So I'll give you that warning up front. But this episode is going to be about kind of me talking about this lack of trust that we have in the institutions, the scientific community, the government, social media, big tech, all these things. And how we necessarily shouldn't blindly trust these institutions, but also how they've lost our trust in these institutions. We shouldn't trust them blindly, but we also shouldn't trust them because they've proven themselves to be untrustworthy. But I also want to, on the flip side, talk about what we as Christians, how we should operate and try to operate from a position of trust, because our message is so important. We don't want people ignoring us because they simply cannot trust us. So that's what this episode is about. Again, I apologize for the audio quality, but hopefully you still enjoy it. Thanks.
I have certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero.
Well, I love that clip from George Carlin, and it's just a classic sentiment that he expressed decades ago that now I think most people can relate to very intimately. This idea that I trust absolutely nothing that the government has to say. Now, it's actually more than the government. It's really, I mean, if you are somebody who's inclined to have that sentiment that I don't trust anything the government tells me, you probably have the sentiment that I don't trust anything that the establishment tells me. That's probably true of you. And if on the opposite side is if you tend to believe the establishment, you tend to believe the government, you tend to believe. So there's kind of this establishment regime, maybe, if is a way to encompass all of this stuff that would encompass the government, it would encompass the elites, it would encompass the celebrity class, the media, the corporate press, all that kind of stuff. If you are inclined to just trust that group of people, you probably are inclined to trust all of those people. It's almost like it's just a group of people. And if you're inclined to increasingly more and more not trust any of them, you're not going to trust. It's not like I trust the government, but I don't trust the corporate press. It's like, no, I don't trust any of it. Now, what's amazing is I watched, I think the movie came out this year, but it's a little bit older, so I'm late coming to it. But this movie, Don't Look Up, which was on Netflix, it's kind of like a dark comedy, social commentary. Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence. I mean, it was kind of an ensemble cast of a movie. But in it, when I watch it, I'm just like, I didn't even need to be told that this movie is about climate change. It's just so on the nose, and I'm not going to necessarily be concerned about spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and I ruined something, I apologize. But it's so on the nose that I don't even know why they had to have interviews explaining that this movie, the underlying message is about climate change. But essentially the premise of the movie is these scientists, Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, have discovered that this comet's about to hit the Earth, and they're trying to warn the powers that be. Hey, there's an impending disaster, and it's going to hit the Earth, and it's going to kill everything on the Earth. And they're having to deal with incompetent and aloof politicians. The media, Ariana Grande plays basically herself, and she's aloof and is more concerned about her relationships. And they go on like a Good Morning America with the corporate press, and they're more concerned about Ariana Grande's relationship with this rapper dude. And they're told, hey, the science is saying this thing's going to hit the Earth. Oh, well, that's kind of depressing. We don't like talking about that stuff. So let's shift over to this. There's the tech industry, the big tech guy. He's like this weird autistic. I don't know what's going on with him. He's very socially awkward. I mean, these are all kind of funny characters, but they all represent these industries that we recognize: media, corporate media, the entertainment business, politicians, big tech. All of these major institutions are laughably over the top, but they're all satires. So there's a semblance of truth to all of them. And here you've got the scientists who are supposed to be the rational, we have the science, we have the facts, we have the data, we're trying to share it with you people, and you're not taking any of this seriously. So, of course, this is supposed to be an analogy of climate change, right? So there's all this data that the world is going to end in 10 years, 12 years, 6 years, however long it's going to take. We're going to reach this point of no return, and all of the data shows this. And so that's what the comet is supposed to be symbolic of. Now, the point of the movie is supposed to be, hey, this should be obvious. We need to be taking action against this climate crisis. Now, the message I took away from it is, even if there is an impending disaster that is coming, a comet, climate change, whatever it might be, even if there is this impending disaster, there's no way that message is going to be able to be received, because the ruling class, the politicians, corporate press, entertainment business, big tech, all of these establishment entities have lost their credibility and their trust. People do not trust them. And what's it was very revealing. Now, I don't know whether this was the filmmaker's intention or not, but even in that, literally, the scientist, Leonardo DiCaprio, and again, spoiler alert, has an affair with Kate Blanchett, who is the Good Morning America news host. So he starts having an affair with her, sleeping with her. These people who you cannot take seriously, who are manipulative. They're trying to manipulate our emotions. Just pay attention to this entertainment star, this kind of thing. Those people are literally in bed with the scientists who we're supposed to be taking as credible, objective. Here's just the data. Here are just the facts. They're literally in bed together. And so even in that, even if there was data, facts, the science, so to speak, so that's what was brilliant about the movie. I mean, I don't necessarily recommend the movie. I mean, it was an R-rated movie. There's everything that comes along with an R-rated movie. But I don't recommend it just because it was too long. It was like 2 hours and 20 minutes long. It could have been a half an hour shorter. Didn't have to be as long as it was. It ended up becoming pretty insulting. It became pretty obvious near the end of the movie that then it became a political divide. Once it became basically irrefutable, now we can see the comet in the sky coming towards the Earth. That's when the "Don't Look Up" motif came in. There was the politicians became the crazy right-winger, science denier type people, and their motto on all of their hats, their MAGA hats or whatever, was "Don't look up." Just ignore the facts, ignore the data, just look down on the ground. And then, of course, the trust the science side of things was the look up party. And what's amazing is, again, even in that, the filmmakers didn't even have the self-awareness to realize that the scientists had kind of almost become politicians. You see them, they're making slogans, they're working in what is clearly like a political action office, a campaign office. So they've got these signs and all this stuff. So they're the look up people, and then there's the don't look down. They've got their MAGA hats and all this stuff. So it kind of became insulting, like only these crazy, stupid, science-denying right-wingers are the don't look up party. They ignore the science. Ignoring the fact that, and what's amazing is this movie came out and it's about climate change, but you can really lay this over the COVID thing. Everything that's happened with COVID, these people, these caricatures in the movie are not worthy of respect or trust or any level of credibility. they're they are not. They're almost like they're not real people, and of course that's the point in the movie. But in real life, it's almost picturing it. The picture is almost supposed to be telling us that you would be ridiculous to not believe the science, when in actuality, it's quite logical to have that George Carlin type mentality. I don't believe anything that these people tell me. So if they're going to tell me that the world is going to end because of climate change, or that the sky is falling, or that there's a big rock going to hit the earth, or that there's this dangerous virus out, killing people, and it came from bats in a wet market, and this COVID vaccine will do this, and this medicine doesn't help, and this treatment does help, and you got to do this to avoid it. We've been able to see that all of these things that are caricatures in the movie, political establishment, social media that will crack down and censor dissenting information, the entertainment business, all of the propaganda. You'll have celebrities out, getting vaccines, wearing their mask, giving messages about it's the right thing to do. You have the corporate press running interference. They've got the chyrons with the dead people numbers just going through, and it's straight out of that movie, Don't Look Up. In the movie Don't Look Up, it's like, of course we wouldn't believe these people. Why would we believe these cartoon characters that can't be taken seriously? And why would we trust the science when the science is literally in bed with these people? And so, of course, you see this all throughout COVID, that the scientists, it seems to be like, man, there seems to be a financial motive. The scientists, the people who are saying you can't have any other kind of safe treatment other than this treatment, this vaccine, you have to take this. Oh, and by the way, the people that made the vaccine, they're the ones who are promoting it. And so you've got politicians giving tax incentives. I mean, this was even the Trump initiative. What was it called? The Operation Warp Speed. That's fine. Giving these, removing regulations and giving incentives for the private market to work quickly in a state of emergency. But then to have those companies that were given these benefits by the government to then work hand in glove with the government, they're going to be paid by the government to distribute these vaccines and these treatments for free. Well, they're making money hand over fist because the government's basically a bottomless pit of money. So all of these things, now, again, you can see it clearly. This is, if anything good came out of COVID, it was that it made it very clear that if you are a person who's prone to trust the science, this was kind of why it was weird. Like, why did this become political? Well, it didn't really become political. It became ideological. So the political was part of the ideology. But why is it that anyone who was like the trust the science crowd was also the pro-masking, the pro-vaccine, the social distancing, the double masking, the boosting, listen to the experts, listen to the propaganda, listen to our politicians? That was all the same group. So if you were to put them in the Don't Look Up movie, they would be the look up people. We trust these ridiculous people on Good Morning America or whatever. I can't remember what the show was on Don't Look Up, but it was like a Good Morning America. We implicitly trust these people. We believe it when Ariana Grande says, get your vaccine and your booster and wear your mask. We believe it when this ridiculous politician seems to be in bed with the pharmaceutical company, we believe them. There's this implicit trust, and that was kind of exemplified in this trust of Fauci. He is the science. Trust the science. It's like, well, how can we trust the science when they seem to be in partnership with these people? So then you had the other group who were not necessarily saying, we don't trust the science. We don't trust the scientist. We don't trust you people who are telling us that there is this virus that's so deadly that it's going to this, that, and the other thing. Just like we don't trust you that there is going to be this climate emergency. Just like we wouldn't trust you if you said that the There's a comet heading towards the Earth and going to destroy everybody. It's the same reason why all these, more bizarre conspiracy theories start to crop up, and people believe them because it's like, did we really land on the moon? I doubt it. The government lies about everything else. Was 9/11 an inside job? Probably, because the government lies about everything else. Are there such thing as nuclear weapons? Probably not, because the government lies about everything else. That's just a threat. And so then now, even down to things like the war in Ukraine, again, painting with broad strokes, there's obviously exceptions to all of this stuff. But if you just paint with broad strokes, again, it's almost like a parody. The same people who were pro-vaccine, pro-mask, pro-government regulations, pro-lockdowns, are also people who are pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia. Putin must go. Send money to Russia, or send money to Ukraine. Ukraine must win. No compromise. No off-ramp. And then there's people who are saying, I don't know, this doesn't seem too smart. Maybe we ought not to be engaged in this potential nuclear war. Maybe we should stop sending money to Ukraine. Why is that? Is it because foreign policy has anything to do with COVID policy? No, but it's the institutions that is telling us those things. It's the corporate press that is saying, put the Ukraine flag in your bio. Pro-Ukraine, Russia bad, Ukraine good. It's Zelensky, who's literally was a comedy actor, who is this entertainment person, that's part of this entertainment cabal. It's the social media that is promoting and silencing dissenting opinions. Like, really, did Ukraine really do this explosion that happened just recently in time of recording? These missiles launched into Poland and killed like 2 people. And immediately it was like, this is Russia. Russia did this. Russia did this. So Zelensky comes out, Russia did this. Well, it turns out probably was a Ukrainian missile that went off course and bombed these people. Okay, well, we'll just, memory hole that story. It just goes away on social media. Politicians stop talking about it. Politicians stop taking into consideration that, if we're giving money to Ukraine and they can't even control where their missiles are going, maybe we should stop giving money to Ukraine. So all of this, the whole apparatus, the whole regime, if you are inclined to just implicitly trust the regime, you will be pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, give money to Ukraine, no off-ramp, Russia must die, Putin must die. And this is probably tied in some way too. I can't prove this, but based on the level of thinking that we humans usually engage in, and we're usually pretty simplistic creatures, I think the vast majority of the people, because they tend to be left-leaning, who are those established, trust the establishment. I honestly think there's also this element of Russia bad because Russia, Trump, Russia collusion, Russia bad, Putin bad, Ukraine must be good because Russia bad. I can't prove that, but I don't put it past some of us people who are pretty simplistic in our thinking that that's part of it. But you get the point. And all you have to do, this is what's, when people talk about being red-pilled, why are we implicitly trusting what the establishment is saying in regards to Ukraine and Russia? These are the same people who lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and got us into a war in Iraq. Now, if you want to be generous, maybe they didn't lie about weapons of mass destruction. But one of 2 things happened. Either they were so diabolical that they did lie to the American people about weapons of mass destruction, or they were so incompetent that they thought the intel that they had was true. It would be like they were so incompetent that they thought that these bombs hitting Poland were from Russia. Oh, nope, turns out they were from Ukraine. Well, these look like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Well, it turns out they're just silos or empty warehouses or whatever it turned out to be. They're either incompetent or they're manipulative and deceptive and evil. Either way, why would we trust these people? Why would we trust this establishment? So all of that to say, that's a long way around to say that these people in the regime, all the people that are that are caricatured and satirized in Don't Look Up. The politicians, the government, entertainment, social media, the corporate press, science, that whole entity, that whole regime is not trustworthy.
If you've been a listener of Faith and Focus for a while, I would encourage you to become a supporter of the ministry by becoming a monthly donor. Your generous donations allow me to continue working within Faith and recording new content. You can find a link to my donation page in the show notes for this episode. Thank you.
So what does this mean for us as Christians? Okay, so obviously we're still called on to respect our government, honor our government, submit to our government, whatever. You can appeal to Romans 13, and in fact Romans 13 was used and is used often to say you must submit to this regime, you must honor this regime, you must whatever, respect all these kinds of things. And to that, and so especially during COVID, that was the case. So to that I would say the corporate press is not the government. Social media is not the government. Entertainment business is not the government. The science is not the government. That doesn't mean you treat scientists or entertainment people with disrespect, but they are not the government. The government in Romans 13 is basically it's described as basically like a minister, a servant of God, and it's kind of almost talked about like in an impersonal. I mean, Paul doesn't say Nero was put in place by God, but he's just saying the government, the mindless, faceless government entity, the power that be that keeps civilization in check to the extent it does it. That's God's instrument, that's God's tool in order to accomplish a specific purpose, to punish wrongdoers and keep society in check. So for that, in that regard, respect it, honor it, submit to it, whatever. But it does not include all those other things. Those things are open to critique. Those things are open to ignore, to have disdain for, maybe. You don't have to have respect for Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk now at Twitter, all these things. Like, that is not God's instrument or tools or servant or minister for a specific purpose. That's not what those things exist for. Those are man-made entities. So putting all those things aside, even with the government, this idea of submitting to the government, of honoring the government, respecting the government, we often, for some reason, and I think that it is born out of a heart of sort of a patriotism, a love for country, a love for, which often gets conflated with the government. I really love Michael Malice. He's an anarchist, so he's against all of government. He actually has a really profound statement. He says, the reason that I hate my government is because I love my country. That's the reason I actually am against the government. But that's coming from an anarchist perspective. But I do think the opposite of that is true. This love of country, it seems to sometimes be a blind loyalty to the state, to the government. And so I think because of that blind loyalty, there's a blind submission, a blind obedience, a blind respect for this minister that is the government, God's servant that he has put in place, the government. But we are, I think in a good way as Christians, moving away from this unhealthy view of submission. And what I mean is, oftentimes we picture submission, a wife submitting to her husband, as you must just sit there and be a doormat and be disrespected and abused and all this kind of stuff. And I think we are waking up, rightfully so, that just to be like, wait a second, that's not what submission means. Submission does not mean being a floor mat for some abusive person. Now, the opposite is also true. You don't submit to a person or an entity only if they are perfect. Well, they're not perfect, so I'm not going to listen to. Like, I think it's a hard attitude of, hey, I'm willing and eager to follow your leading. But, if a person becomes abusive, we tell a wife, we counsel a wife now in the church. We should anyways. If there's abuse happening, you need to get out of that. You need to report that. That might not necessarily advocating divorce, but you need to protect yourself. You need to protect kids. You are in no obligation to sit there and be a punching bag for this so-called man. We are starting to wake up that that's true in the church as well. This blind obedience and submission to an abusive institution and an abusive literal ministers of the gospel. We're starting to wake up to the fact that, no, that's not acceptable. You're not allowed to hide behind this veil of authority that confers upon you this due respect and submission. We're getting away from that too. If you are in a toxic church, if you have leadership in a church that is truly toxic and abusive, which does happen because they're a power center, so people are prone to hopefully submit to them. Well, if you've got people following you, you can abuse that. We're getting to the point to where we realize, no, that's not acceptable either. You get out of that church, you report that pastor, whatever is going on, you get out of that situation. That doesn't require your blind submission and obedience. I think we need to realize that that's the case with the government. This idea of, I'm willing to submit myself to a minister of God, namely a servant of God, meaning the government entity. But there's a point where they become abusive and they cross that line and they start to violate certain rights. And we have precedent for this in the Bible. People often talk about examples in the New Testament where Christians like Peter and James and John, they did disobey excuse the train driving by. They did disobey their government. Their religious leaders said, you need to stop doing this. They arrested them and beat them, and you need to stop preaching the gospel. And they said, nah, sorry, we're not going to stop preaching the gospel. You can beat us and throw us in prison all you want. So we recognize that, but we also have an example of Paul later on, who was a Roman citizen, and they had him basically arrested, chained up against the law. They had imprisoned him essentially without a trial. And back in Roman law, they had due process. You could not just arrest somebody like that. So Paul was getting his rights stripped away as a Roman citizen, and they're about to beat him. And then he says, is it lawful for you to beat a Roman citizen? And then they freak out like, oh no, we didn't realize he was a Roman citizen. We've been violating his rules or his rights this time. So there is this biblical precedent to claim certain rights that come from God. We submit foremost to God. So if you as the government, yes, you're a minister and a servant of God that we ought to submit to. But if you cross a line, you've lost our obedience, you've lost our submission, you've lost, however you want to phrase that, maybe respect, whatever. Because Paul also says respect to whom respect is due. So that is something that's earned, and honor in that sense seems to be something that's earned. But I think that we as Christians, kind of taking all of these kind of seemingly random thoughts, that what is our role as Christians? Well, first of all, we ought to recognize that these power institutions that seem to be working all together, they always seem to be a package deal. You believe the science, you believe the government, you believe the media, you believe the propaganda from the celebrities, all of this stuff. You believe all of those things, or you don't believe any of it. We have to recognize that there's not a package deal. I'm no obligation to other institutions. I have a certain obligation to the government, but even they are required to do what God has appointed them to do. Punish evildoers, keep civilization in check. And I have a certain responsibility to not submit and to rebel, if you want to say that. I don't, it's not quite the right word, but not submit, whatever the opposite of not submit is. And so we have an obligation and a duty to do that. But something else we have to also understand is that the church is also, in the same way that you have the corporate press, social media, celebrities, the government, science, the scientific community, the church is also an institution. And we as Christians are nodes within that institution. If you want to use biblical language, we are members of the body of Christ. So it ought to be incumbent upon us to respect truth. We are, in theory, we are a community of truth. We are a pillar of truth. We follow Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. So truthfulness, honoring truthfulness, because the flip side of truthfulness is deceit. And there's a weird thing with truthfulness and deceit, is it's not really asymmetrical. And you probably know this in your own personal life. If somebody lies to you once, that trust is broken. And they might say, well, I don't understand why you're so upset about this. Okay, I did lie once, I was deceptive, but I'm truthful 99% of the time. Well, it doesn't really shake out that way. It's not like, well, if you lie to me 51% of the time, now you're untrustworthy. It doesn't really work that way. So trust and deception is a very sensitive issue, and trust can be lost very easily, and trust is very hard to gain back. So that's what we see happening in the world now, is these institutions have lost trust to the point where people will think that, we are living in a matrix. We didn't really go to the moon. Just things like the government could say the sky is blue, and people will say, well, it probably actually isn't blue, because if the government's telling me this, I don't believe anything that they tell me. We have to strive as Christians within the body of Christ to try to ensure, and a lot of this ground has been lost already, to try to ensure that our churches, our places, are centers of trust and honesty and faithfulness and truthfulness. Because again, we can fall prey, and I think we do fall prey to the same problem that the world's institutions fall prey to. We have weapons of mass destruction. We have Putin bad, Ukraine good, all these kinds of things. And people say, we don't believe you. I don't care if you were to say a comet is falling to the earth and we're all going to die in 6 months. I do not believe you, and that is your fault. You've lost the trust of the people as an institution. We as Christians and in the church, we are in a position where we have a message that we want to share and that we are obligated to share with people. This don't look up. It's like God is up there, and we're all going to stand before God, and there is a judgment day coming. So we can stand on street corners and hold signs and yell at people, you're going to hell, God's going to judge you, the wrath of God, blah, blah, blah. Those things all might be legitimate, but if we've lost the trust of people, they're not going to listen to that message. And in fact, they might believe the opposite. Oh, you say that God is holy and righteous and good. Well, I don't believe that, so God must be an evildoer. You say that God says marriage is this thing. Well, we don't believe that, and we're going to rebel against that. God says man and women are this thing. Well, we don't believe that. We're going to reject that. It's very hard to regain trust, and it's very hard to preach the gospel and win an audience with people when they, right out of the gate, do not believe anything that you say. So that would be my encouragement, to, on the one hand, have a healthy, I don't want to say disregard, healthy skepticism of the government. I think that's a safe place to be. I think there's so much damage that gets caused when we just, think about it as a Christian. The government is, all throughout biblical prophecy, you can think of the book of Daniel. The beast that Daniel see are government empires. They are the state. They are empires of this world. They are evil. They are anti-God. Why would we trust? This is an empire set up by Satan. Why would we implicitly just trust? I just blindly trust you. That just doesn't make sense from a biblical standpoint. It definitely doesn't make sense when the veil is dropping and we can see that they are deceiving us. So I would encourage you as a Christian, if you are in that camp of I trust these institutions, you need to stop. You need to stop doing that, because these people are evil and they do not deserve your trust.
On the flip side, we learn to be trustworthy. Learn that trust can be easily broken, and you can violate people's trust. And again, not because it's important to be trustworthy. Of course, that's a fruit of the Spirit, trustworthiness and faithfulness. But because we have a purpose in being here. We are ambassadors for Christ, making an appeal to the world to be reconciled to God. If as an ambassador we do not have the trust of those people in which we are being ambassadors to, well, we're basically making the work harder. So that would be my encouragement. It's kind of two-sided. Distrust the world system and be a trustworthy person to elevate the trustworthiness of the church as an institution, your local church as a kind of an outpost of the global church within your organization, and you as an individual, as an ambassador for Christ. All of those levels, we have to make sure we're protecting truthfulness, honoring truthfulness, and not falling victim and prey to these pitfalls that we can fall into. So that would be my episode, my encouragement for you today. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I would love to hear your feedback. Either comment on the social media post that this is on, or comment in the comment section on YouTube. Email me. The email's in the link. I would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. Thanks. While Faith in Focus is a ministry of InFaith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of InFaith as a mission.